live here at KVAN Visionary Radio today. The founder of KVAN Radio, Gabriel Virancha, also known as Talius Van, his musical name. You'll hear his music on KVAN. He hosted Clyde Bellecourt about 17 years ago in Sedona, Arizona. And this was at a beautiful event that also involved Wallace Black Elk and others. And so we are honored to have Clyde here with us today. And thank you, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Yeah, and would you like to share a little bit about your name, Thunder Before the Storm? And
Well, actually, I got my name in 1973. I should have got that at birth, 82 years ago. But back then, we were forbidden to pray, we were forbidden to sing, dance, or carry on our traditional way of life.
yeah.
And one of the biggest things that they did to us, they refused to allow us to have an Indian name, because in our way of life, the Anishinaabe people of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Canada, there was a time in our history that every child, even before they were born, a medicine person, maybe a grandma, if it was a girl, were given tobacco, and they were to go out and seek a name. In my situation, there was a major attempt on my life in 1973 following Wounded Knee, where I shot point blank by a guy with a .38 dum-dum. I say .38 dum-dum is because they file a lead flat and they put an X in it. So when it hits you, it goes boom 4 ways and blows you apart.
Wow.
But I survived that. And when I came home to Minneapolis, I was in the hospital for several weeks, healing. I was shot right below the heart. And my wife kept bugging me every day, you gotta go over to Wisconsin, Ed Bearhart's, they want you to come there this weekend. I said, I can't leave the hospital. I'm all stapled together. They have big staples across holding me together. And I kept telling her I couldn't do it. She just kept on me and on me. And finally I said, well, let's go, And the nurse overheard us, and you're not going nowhere. A little bit later on, we told her we're going to go outside and get a little fresh air and smoke a cigarette. And she allowed me to do that. And I took my pants and put it in a pillowcase and sat out in a wheelchair, and they wheeled me down and got in my car and went over to Wisconsin. And when I got there, it just blew my mind. There was cars from all over America, people that were in Wounded Knee in 1973, heard that I got shot, and even heard that I was killed. It came on TV early that morning. My wife turned on the TV 400 miles from where I was shot and saw a picture of me that I was killed by a guy on the Rosebud Indian Reservation. And she didn't tell me that they were going to have a ceremony, and they were going to have it called the making of a chief. They have never done that for over 100 years. They were forbidden to do that. But in order to be given an Indian name and to become a chief, you had to have a name. And so unbeknown to me, they sent this young man out into the woods. His name was Eddie Benton Benet, about Weedun, sounding voice. And he was a key person in my life. He's the one that taught me about spirituality and everything. And so I went over to Wisconsin. When I got there, they had this big ceremony going to go on. And I found out they were going to have this making of a chief, but they told me I had to have an Indian name before you could even touch an eagle feather. That's how sacred it was. So they sent this young man out in the woods, and they figured in 4 days the Creator would come to you through a vision, through a dream, etc. And he said on the third night of his vision quest, they call it, he was praying and put his sema or tobacco out and asked the Creator, they're going to have this big ceremony for my brother tomorrow, and he has to have his name because they're going to give him an eagle feather and make him a chief. And I didn't know any of this, And I pulled in next morning there, and there was just cars all over in the woods, and they took me into a sweat lodge ceremony, and he told me on the third night of his dream, he begged the Creator for a name. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, he could see the trees started to blow back and forth in the woods where he's all by himself. The trees started blowing back and forth, and there was sheet lightning coming from the west. And as it got closer, boom, there was a thunder that woke him up, and it started, big lightning came, and these trees, and it started to drizzle. Packed up his gear and came home, and told me that morning there in the sweat lodge that from that day forth, my name would be Neegonnwayweedun. Well, what does it mean? He said, it means that you are the thunder before the storm.
Beautiful.
I said, wow, you know. Then they took me into this big roundhouse where they had this old ancient drum there and a war bustle. When they make you a chief, they put a war bustle on you. This old man was there, and his name Jack Musquati, and he prayed in Ojibwe, and it was interpreted to me. The reason why they're going to give me that is I went to Wounded Knee to defend the women and children, and I was shot. I gave my life for what I believed in. That was an assassination attempt on my life. And they brought out this big bustle, and I found out all these people were invited from all over the country to be there, because that's the first time that's happened in 100 years. So the old man had a ceremony and put a war bustle on me, and I danced 4 times around the drum, and they told me that from that day forth, you will be the thunder before the storm.
Well, thank
I
you.
was all excited, you know. They gave me put an eagle feather in my hair,
Wow.
and you become a chief. So that's where my name comes from today.
Well, thank you for
And he
sharing
also
your name.
told me to tell people that everywhere I travel, that they should name their children, whether it's a boy or a girl. They should seek out a traditional person to give that child, even when it's still in the womb. They can do that. So today, as I travel throughout Indian America, there's just hundreds, thousands, probably millions of indigenous people. They have their names again. They followed that
Beautiful.
that effort, and that commitment that this old man made to everyone.
Thank you for sharing. I'd like to share a little bit with our listeners on a little bit more about who you are. Clyde Bellecourt is the founder and national director of AIM, so it's honored to have you here. He was born in the Ojibwe tribe on the White Earth Chippewa Reservation in northern Minnesota in 1936. He has been a relentless national and international advocate for social justice and equality all his life. So I'm honored to have you here today.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask you a few questions that are going to relate with the topic of your talk tomorrow night, which is American Indian Movement, Past, Present, and Future. I would like to start with a couple questions that relate to the AIM movement. I understand from nativenewsonline.net that AIM was founded in 1968, and there it states that it was founded by yourself, Dennis Banks, Vernon Bellecourt, which I believe is your brother, and George Mitchell. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yes, yes.
You want to share a little bit
And
more
a lot
about
of
that?
women.
Okay.
The majority of the people that came to that meeting, we organized for about 6 solid months, and we live in a community of probably 25,000 Native people. We went door knocking, did everything. We went bars and everything to tell people we're going to have this meeting and create a new organization. And it was all about police brutality then, what was going on in our community and wasn't being dealt with. And so I was working at a place called Northern States Power Company. I was the first Indian to have a job in a major corporation in Minneapolis. And I actually had an opportunity to go back to school for 5 years and become a nuclear engineer with Northern States Power. Luckily, the American Indian movement came along. Otherwise, I'd be one of the biggest polluters in America today. But I went to that meeting. We did a lot of work, and only about 60, 70 people showed up. They were so beaten down that they didn't think anything could change for them. Housing and health and education and job opportunity. They just didn't believe nothing could change. But most of the people that came to that night were women with their children. And I always, ever since that day, I cannot give a talk without talking about them, because it's the women and the children that suffer the most when there's poverty and unemployment and all those things. You know, they have men make babies, but they disappear. They never take care of them. And so that was out of my agenda. And so they had nominations, and myself and Dennis Banks was nominated for leader of this new organization. And they cast ballots, and I ended up with like 90-some% of the vote. So then the women asked us, challenged us to get up and tell us what you're going to do. And I coined a phrase that, because it just came out of the top of my head. I said, they start talking about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. He's got millions of people marching all over the world. Look at us, so pitiful. we are, how do you expect to make that change? And I told him, well, our struggle is not about civil rights. That's a black and white issue today. That's the people that we're dealing with. And I said, our civil and human rights are embedded in every one of our treaties. So our treaty will be our defense. We'll utilize everything that we do, we'll do it on a treaty, because in our treaties, between two governments, Indian people and the United States federal government, they guaranteed us the right to hunt and fish and gather, to teach our children the language and the traditional way of life. Everything they told us they were going to do, they were in violation of that. And we're the most poverty-stricken people in America at that time. And they kept asking, well, how are you going to change that? And just like the Creator gave me, I coined a phrase, we'll do it through confrontation politics. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, what does that mean? I said, if you have a problem with the mayor, the chief of police, somebody got shot, or kids are being discriminated against in the public school system because they're not teaching them anything about the contributions made to modern day society, we'll go deal with them. If it's a principal, we'll go knock on their door. If it's the mayor, if it's the chief of police, and if they don't hear a knock because they're paying all this attention to Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and they just forgot about it, then you got to knock a little louder. But you got to plan things. What are you going to do when they respond, when they ask you what your issue is? And if they don't open their door, you knock the damn door down. But when you're going there, you got to know exactly what you want. And we got to relate it to our treaties. We're not a civil and human rights organization. We're battling on our treaty rights. If the government lived up to its treaty rights, there'd be no demonstrations or anything. And about half the people ran out the door when they heard me say that. But the very next day, I went to work. We started confronting the superintendent of schools. And when they wouldn't make any change, we made it. We built our own schools. We built the only 2 alternative schools in the nation. And after we started teaching children about their culture and their traditional way of life, they become proud. They want to go to school. And they took statistics every year. For 26 years, we graduated more students from White Earth and the Red Schoolhouse in St. Paul and the whole public and parochial school systems of Minneapolis. So we knew we were effective and we could do it. And the money started rolling in. The public schools and parochial schools weren't going to do it, but they were willing to give us the money to deal with it. They're willing to give us the dropouts, the ones that didn't want to go to school, problem children, they call them. And they ended up with us. The only difference in our school is every morning we had what was called circle time. We developed that. We brought the drum up and we prayed and we sang together and danced together. When the kids went to school, they had smiles on their face. And then we converted the high school kids into teaching the grade school kids. If they're falling behind in spelling or math or English or history, then the older students would come and teach them that. And because of that, we had the highest retention rate in the nation. Of course, when you're doing things right, the money starts flowing because they knew they'd rather give us the problem children and try to do it themselves. Wow. So we knew that we could be successful. But we found out many years later, I talked about resources. I said the reason, we own today, 80% of all the energy resources left in America is still on our land. And 90% of all the fresh water comes from this northern watershed. They're talking about piping water now from Lake Superior all over out west here to all Reno and all those casinos and all that stuff. They're going to pump our water, take our water. That's going to be bigger than the oil crisis because nothing can live without water. And so I said we have to take those issues on. Hunting, fishing rights. We never gave up that right to hunt and fish, even off the land that was ceded to the federal government, that we retained the right to hunt and fish, otherwise we would have never made it. Yeah. So, we had to have that food to eat. Elliott Abrams was Secretary of Defense at that time, and we heard later on that they had a major meeting because a lot of Indian people started listening to us and doing what we told them they had to do. And Elliott Abrams said that we became the #1 threat to the security and stability of the United States government, and they got to get rid of us. Wow. My chest got like that when I heard that day. So small in numbers. And then we finally, after the Wounded Knee trials took place, they lasted 9.5 months. The trials in St. Longest trial in the criminal history of the federal government against Indian people. Every day of the week, we had one lawyer named Larry Leventhal. His sole job was to bring in the treaty of 1868. And the judges didn't know anything about treaties. The lawyers don't know anything about it. Senators don't know anything. Presidents don't know anything. And he started telling Mr. Levin, you don't bring that. I told you not to bring that treaty in. That's for the Congress of the United States to deal with, not me. You know, and Larry kept bringing it in. Toward the end of the trial, he was using that treaty as our defense. He started listening to us. And as everybody knows, after 9.5 months, we found the government guilty of governmental misconduct, illegal use of military forces, and illegal search and seizure. And the judge, who was a very racist, his name was Fred Nichols, very racist from South Dakota, he said the rivers of justice, these are his words, the rivers of justice have been muddied in my courtroom for 9.5 months. And I refuse to allow it to go any further. Who do you think you are? You're telling Indian people they can't pray and they can't sing and they can't dance. He brought up all those issues that we were struggling for. And he says, that's when he said, the rivers of justice have been muddied in my courtroom for 9.5 months. And he singled out the head of the FBI right in the courtroom.
Wow.
He said, you came into my office 3 times and lied to me. There was a young man living in California, never been to Wounded Knee. And he was brought in as a government witness, never was in Wounded Knee. But the Justice Department Community Relations Division, who came into Wounded Knee to try to settle the dispute, was supplying the FBI and all the information who was in each bunker. And they were using this young guy. So about 2 weeks before the trial ended, they brought this young man to testify against us. Problem is, the night before he was supposed to testify, he met a girl. The FBI was driving him all over Minneapolis, St. Paul, because he was claiming the American movement was going to kill him and all that kind of drama stuff. And he met a young farm girl across the river in Wisconsin, 20 miles from St. Paul. And they had a few drinks together at closing time. With the FBI agents listening and watching everything, he took her home, offered to take her home so he could party a little bit. So he went home and the FBI agents were in another room and listening to everything that was going on. Wow. They were drinking beer and he tried to hit on this young lady. He said, I just got to know you. No, I'm not going to do that. Pretty soon they heard him wrestling in a room. And he took her down and he raped her with a beer bottle, shoved the beer bottle up inside her. And the FBI agents broke the door down and took that young girl to the hospital. And then they asked the doctors if they would not release that information the next day. Wow. They'd wait a couple of days because this guy was going to testify. And the judge brought that all up. And William Kunstler was questioning him that day. And we noticed that the door behind the judge was cracked open a little bit. They're supposed to be sequestered so they can't hear anything that's going on, the 2 agents. And this young man was giving his testimony. And they were leading up. We did an investigation. We knew that he raped this girl. We had talked to the doctors and everything. They talked about how the FBI come in and silence them. And so the judge, William Kunstler, led him right up to that issue. Well, weren't you in Wisconsin the other day? And first of all, he said, weren't you in California? All this stuff was going on at Wounded Knee. You were out soliciting money for the American Indian movement. They didn't see a penny. And then he said, did you meet a young lady night before that? He put his head down and he wouldn't answer the question. And the judge said, you got to answer the question, And he said he was scared and all that, but he finally I met her and we went over to this motel. And he said, did you try to get next to her? And he said, what do you mean? Did you try to make out with her? And he wouldn't answer the question. The judge asked him again to ask him. And then Kunstler says, what happened after that? Didn't the agents have to break in the door and stop you? Did you use a bottle on this girl? And the kid just started tears in his eyes. And when William Kunstler asked him that question, he walked up behind the judge, his chambers, where the 2 FBI agents were sequestered, turned the knob and pulled the door open, and those 2 agents fell right into the courtroom. So we all jumped up, all the AIM members jumped up. We chased them all over the downtown St. Paul. The skywalks, when you go across the street in a glass skywalk. We're going to make a citizen's arrest on him, have him charged. Well, the judge, when he threw all the charges out, he brought that whole case up. Said, you come in my room and you lied to me 3 times. I don't even want to see your face again. In fact, he said, you can get out of my courtroom right now. He chased the head of the FBI out of the courtroom. And that's when he threw out all the charges on it. I was scheduled to go on trial next. I was facing over 300 years in prison plus 2 life sentences. I almost did cartwheels when the guy threw the charges out. But we brought in all the top lawyers in the country. It was my job to do that. I left Wounded on the 51st day. There was the traditional people in the Civil Rights Division, all those groups, tribal elders, picked me to go out because they were trying to demonize us at that time. Right. They had us surrounded by all the armed forces. There was 18 different law enforcement agencies surrounding us, all the military, without presidential or congressional approval. And the judge brought that up, questioned them, how can you use military force without congressional approval? Nobody can do that. And he threw out all the charges. 9.5 months trial. Wow. And we had people, celebrities, Marlon Brando and Dick Gregory, all these people, traditional chiefs, they'd come to the trial in their traditional garb, war bonnets and everything, the way it was, 100 years ago. They'd come sit in their courtroom. One day the judge was admonishing us. Somebody started laughing when somebody got caught lying on the witness stand. And we started laughing, and the judge got kind of mad, and he admonished us if we do that again, he was going to kick us out of the courtroom. And he says, he looked at Frank Fulsco, traditional chief, and said to him, and you, I don't want you to come into my courtroom again wearing all that garb out. You come in your dress right, start criticizing our chief. So then we had a hearing after every trial day. We'd have this discussion among one another, what we're going to do. Tomorrow, and Frank Fulsco, who barely speaks English, he says, who does that judge think he is anyway? Comes in and criticizing me for being in my traditional dress, and here he walks in the courtroom every day with a big black dress on. It was just crazy.
It is crazy. And I am going to be asking you some more questions. Thank you for sharing about those beginning days of AIM. It sounds wild, everything that you went through and continue to go through, I'm sure.
Well, we took the position that we're not going to deal with the government anymore. We knew that the white European education, the federal government, the BIA, and the organized religion were the 3 worst enemies of Indian people. Yeah. They relocated us by the millions into the boarding school systems. And when the First World War broke out, there was 50,000 Indian people enlisted right out of those boarding schools. My dad was one of them. Wow. Went across there and gave their lives against the treaties, because the treaties, when they made a treaty with the United States government, they said they would lay down their guns and never again take it up against any nation. So they were exempt from going. But to get out of that brutal educational system, my father was one of them. They enlisted in the armed forces. My father enlisted in the Marine Corps. Wow. Came home with 17 machine gun wounds, gassed and bloated, steel plate in his head, and then one in his arm to stay alive, and they gassed him and machine gunned him when the Allied forces were coming in. The only reason why my dad is alive, him and 10 other Marines crawled under the dead bodies because the Germans were coming along, and anybody that was quibbling a little bit, they were shooting them in the head. And my dad said he woke up one day and he thought he was sweating, and his skull was dislocated, sitting over here. And he ran his hands right over the brain and that, and lived through it. He came home with 17 machine gun wounds, gassed and bloated. Wow. And all that, and it turned out to be, they heard English and French being spoken. And as the Allied force, they started taking all the dead bodies and putting them in wagons and stuff, horse-drawn wagons to go rebury them. And they found my dad, and he was still alive. Lived 54, fathered 7 girls and 5 boys. He was supposed to be totally disabled. He used to make jokes about that.
What a powerful man.
Yeah.
Well, you come from a powerful line, and I just am amazed when I hear you speak and hear these stories that this is not what our schools are taught.
Yeah.
This text is completely changed, and the history is a lie in the textbooks in our schools. And I was blessed to grow up with the true story, but it amazes me to realize that so many don't know
I never heard my
history.
I never heard my mother's story until after Wounded Knee. My mother was scared to death. She'd go live in Denver with my brother because I was always getting arrested, shot, and confrontations almost every day. And she'd go live with my brother, and she started having heart murmurs and heart problems. And one day he came in and he confronted me, my brother. He was a very successful businessman, you know, in Denver. He was sold land and everything. I'm trying to win the land back, and he was selling it. And I confronted him about it. But he came and told me, you know, you're driving your mother to her grave. He told me, and I said, what? What do you mean? That's why she comes to Denver. She can't be near you anymore because of what you're doing. Scared you're going to get shot and killed and, you know, and all that. And I said, well, I didn't know that. I said, but I'll talk to her tonight. And I went and talked to her, and she told me for the first time, 30-some years old, she told me her story. She was in a boarding school for 9 solid years, never allowed to go home. And just hundreds like her. When they got caught speaking Indian, they would give them a little pail of water and a toothbrush and a cloth, and their job was to scrub the floor to clean out the urinals and toilet when they got caught speaking Indian. But even on her deathbed, I told the doctor to take all the tubes out of her because she didn't want that ever to happen. She didn't even want to go in a hospital. And when they took them all out, she starts singing. This old lady, I didn't know what she was singing, this old lady with her head down, this friend that she was in a boarding school with. And then she looked up at me with a big smile. I said, what's my mom singing about? She was singing about the wild rice fields of White Earth and the beautiful birch bark trees and the lakes, the clear lakes and water and the blueberry pickings and all that. And she went to her dying day, she never gave it up.
Wow.
But she got hundreds and thousands of like her. I can tell this story in Canada anywhere, and old people will get up crying and start talking about it. And my dad, he enlisted in the Marine Corps just to get away from that.
Right.
50,000 of them. And you know, now, just in the past 2 or 3 years, we hear about the Navajo code talkers. Well, the Ojibwe's had code talkers too. We don't hear about that. It was Indian people that saved them during the war because they couldn't break that code, the Navajo code talkers. I met some of them. I know them, you know. Went and ate with them and everything. Tracked them down to tell them about my dad because they were part of all that.
Wow, well,
so then when I find all out, then I know we're right and what we're doing is right. Just made us stronger and stronger and stronger. Especially when my mom was gone. When that old lady told me that, she would start smiling, and I really felt good. She was going home. You know, and made me feel good.
Yeah.
That she held on to her language, even though we never learned. She never wanted to. I hear old people come to our house at night. They think we're all sleeping, and they knock on the door real lightly. And old lady Mitchell and Mrs. Big Bear, they come in and, honey, and they talk Indian to one another, thinking we're all sleeping, right, upstairs. Then they sit down and play cards, start telling Indian stories. They'd laugh so hard they'd be crying, falling right off the chair. Next morning I'd confront my mom, not just me and my sister. Mom, I heard you talking to old lady Big Bear last night. You were having such a wonderful time. How come you don't teach us? Oh, go to school, study hard. Who knew you might be president? You would never tell us.
Wow.
Why, you know? And I just resented all that.
Wow.
I started running away from school when I was 11 years old. I was picked up, and the only way, my mom came to court at me, and the priests and the nuns came there, and my mom begged me, cried and begged me to go back to that school, and I told them I couldn't do it. So the judge judged me incorrigible, and I was sent to Red Wing. I was supposed to be there 2 to 6 months, then they're going to send me to some place called Boys Town, Nebraska, which I found out later was run by the Catholic Church, so I didn't want to go there either, you know. And so that's where I started really learning. And the reason why she didn't want us to speak the language and all that, she thought about scrubbing floors. And on being in a mission school, they would do that to us. You know, she never taught us anything about the culture and language. So when the movement formed, that was my #1 priority, was find all those children that went through those boarding schools and separated from their families forever. When they adopted Indian children, they call it parental determination of rights. It's a nice saying, you know. they take the children from the family. They're not to see one another ever again. They separate. One might become a Lutheran, a Mormon, a Catholic. I had two of them going to school in Edison High in Minneapolis. In 2 years, they went to school and didn't know they were brother and sister. We're actually going out together.
Wow.
Didn't know they were brother and sister.
Oh my gosh.
And then there was another one came. This old lady was shopping down on Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis, and she met this girl in a store. When they got ready to leave, they had all their groceries, and they come walking around the corner, and they ran into one another, and there was cans flying all over. They went and picked these cans up, and they started laughing. And she said, "Hey, you come down here often?" "Oh," she said, I come here every Friday." "Well, why don't you meet me here next Friday?" And "Yeah, sure, we can do that." So we went next Friday. They went and bought some Dixie Cups ice cream, and they went across in the park. And this young woman started questioning the older one. "Well, where are you from?" "I'm from Monoman, Minnesota." She said, "Is that on the White Earth Reservation?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, who are you married to?" And she said, "My name is Green. My maiden name is Green, but I married a Bellecourt, my brother Charles, that went to the Second World War."
Yeah.
And she says, and we got married, and then we separated, and we lost our children through the social welfare system, all 5 of kids. And that girl started crying. It's her mother.
Oh my gosh.
So
Wow.
she met her mother. And her mother told her where I lived. She come over to my house. And I told her where her sisters and brothers were. 54 years old. That's the story of every Indian in America. Every one of us are recipients of that. What the church and their boarding schools did to us. Every single one of us. It's still going on today. That's why we formed the Legal Rights Center. I've worked with hundreds, thousands of them, reuniting them. We have ceremonies at a big Indian center in Minneapolis. We have every year. We bring in those families all together. Some of them meet one another for the first time. I just met a niece. I thought I found all my nephews and nieces. I just met a niece, 62 years old, called me about 4 months ago. I couldn't believe it. This woman came, she was in Chicago, and she was into heroin and all that, and she had this little baby, and she went over to this Catholic ministries there, and this nun knocked on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning. This nun came, and she handed this nun the baby, and she said she was on heroin and knew she wasn't capable of taking care of that baby. She wanted to leave him with him. And that same nun called me up about 7 months ago. Turned out, 62 years old, turned out to be my niece. Reunited. That's what I do. It's kind of work all the way up in Canada and all over. We think it's bad here. Yeah. And we're up in Canada right now. There's over close to 1,500 Indian women missing right now. Up in Manitoba, hundreds of them missing.
Yeah, this is very powerful to hear you talk and
So
to share.
that's why I wanted the movement, the Legal Rights Center. You know, the head federal judge, appointed by Paul Wells, he worked for me 7 years. You know, him the head federal judge. He's the one that's handling all these Somali boys that were trying to go over to Syria and join ISIS. He's the one that's handling those kind of cases. He worked for me for 7 years.
Wow.
Come applied for a job. He came out of University of Minnesota. He was 24 years old. He saw there was an executive director's position at the Legal Rights Center. I was one of the founders of that. And he said, I decided to go there. And he said, I was interviewed by Clyde Bellecourt, Mary Jane Wilson, Emma Mae Dixon, a former black prostitute, became one of our best workers in the court system. And he said, after they got done with me, I found out I didn't know nothing. In my book, he said I didn't know shit. You know, and he went on to become the head federal judge, only first black federal judge in our district. Handles all the hunting and fishing rights, cases that we were fighting for 100 years. He went all the way to the Supreme Court and was upheld that we never gave away that right. Now they owe us billions of dollars, and we haven't seen a penny of it because they confiscated our cars, our boats, our nets, and everything for 100 years. They got away with that until the movement formed, and we challenged them. You know.
What a thing. Well, thank you. In your, hearing you speak, it's very powerful, and I can't help but feel a lot with you. And
Well, if people that are listening tonight, if they heard what I had to say, they'll probably be calling, telling you what happened to them.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
happened in every tribe in America. That's why I don't mind talking about it.
Yeah.
I know it. I know what went on.
Yeah, you do.
And I know people didn't even want to talk about it. They only want their kids to speak their language again because they knew it would be punished for it. You know. Now everybody's got Indian, everybody's speaking the language. Those grade school kids, we got a school in Minneapolis, even the teachers have to speak Ojibwe.
Wow.
Nobody speaks English in the school. My daughter comes home, 7 years old, talks Ojibwe to me, and I don't know what she's talking about.
Wow.
I have to tell, she tells me what she's talking about.
Well, that is due to your work, of course.
And that happens in every family in America.
Yeah.
That's why this movement is still here, you know,
Yeah.
because we take on those issues.
Well, thank you. And, I want to just remind the listeners and also anyone who's just joined us that I'm talking to Clyde Bellecourt. Honored to be speaking with Clyde today. Thank you so much. In your own words, you share that AIM is deeply rooted in spirituality and belief in the connectedness of all indigenous peoples. You've led a life as an activist and freedom fighter, had experiences on the trail of broken treaties and at Wounded Knee, were involved in the cases of Leonard Pelter and murdered AIM activist Anna Mae Aquash, just to name a few of the causes and experiences in your life. If you could name one thing, one outstanding issue that you could change overnight for the Native people today, what would that be?
Reuniting families have been split apart because of the judicial systems and social welfare systems of America. You know, they call it parental determination of rights. I start calling it parental termination of rights, you know, and we started doing, that was a big one for us. But when we came out of the Wounded Knee trials, we knew they were never going to listen to a treaty because they don't know anything about them. Never been taught. Very few colleges, universities are teaching Indian law today. That's why we have 198 casinos now. Tribes, some tribes have 3 or 4 of them because they're going on their treaty rights. The only one that would talk about treaty rights was the American Indian movement, and it was embedded into them. The other biggest thing is that we went to the United Nations. We were asked to form an International Indian Treaty Council following the Wounded Knee trial. And we held it in Standing Rock, where the big demos were going on last year. And all the traditional, we didn't invite no tribal chairman, you know, none of these people that work for the government. We invited traditional leaders to come. They're still here today. And 96 tribal traditionals showed up. They felt so good, they directed the American Indian movement. They formed what is called the International Indian Treaty Council. And they directed us to go to the United Nations, and we did. And it only took us a year and a half. No Indian tribe or organization, indigenous people ever in history have gotten to that level where the government, the United States, or the United Nations listened to us. But they also told us it's not about the American Indian movement anymore, it's about indigenous people all over the world. So it's like throwing a stumbling block. You know, they didn't think that we would last that long. It took us 30 years, but we canvassed Indian people all over, up in the Bering Straits. We went up in Norway with the Sami, the reindeer people. They're all traditional individuals. We went down into the Congo, where black people don't have churches or schools or nothing. They still teach their own language and all that. When we got done, you look at the United Nations report, when 2007, they finally passed the International Rights of Indigenous People. And they said now, today, the American movement, which started in Minneapolis with a few women and children, now represent over 385 million indigenous people in the world. 30 years, they thought we'd cave in and give up, you know, and finally we put it before them and they believed it. We call it the Permanent Forum on the Rights of Indigenous People. And we're the ones that funded ourselves, you know, traveled all the world, met those people. And they endorsed and supported us, and they finally come out with the international right. The only ones that didn't sign it was Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and United States. Finally, Australia signed on. United States and Canada, they all signed on. And That's when they said now that we represent 385 million indigenous people. No tribe or organization, indigenous people in the world has been able to accomplish that.
That's amazing.
But it all started with just a few of us.
That's right.
Mostly women,
That's
women and
powerful.
children.
Wow, thank you. And you're also the founder of Heart of the Earth Survival School, the first parental control, culturally based educational program in America. And you are also co-founder of the Legal Rights Center, which you mentioned a little bit ago, which has handled more than 80,000 cases over the past 45 years, providing criminal defense and restorative justice services to low-income people, in particular people of color and juveniles at no cost, as well as co-founder of the Minneapolis Indian Health Board, the first urban Indian program in America. You are also a coordinator of the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media, which has changed over 2,000 racist and hateful mascots and names in schools throughout America. So it's absolutely amazing, all that you have accomplished.
Well, we quit asking people to do this when we just started doing it ourselves. Self-determination.
That's the way, huh?
Self-determination means sovereignty when you practice it.
Absolutely.
You know.
And it's very apparent that you care very much for the youth. And as the youth are the future, can you speak to how you envision AIM in the future? Will the youth of today take on the mantle of AIM?
I'm not even, you know why I'm not worried about that? In Anishinaabe prophecies and the fulfillment, we're in the 7th generation. They have a 7th generation prophecy. Nobody knows who's going to speak to the 8th generation.
Wow.
I know who they are. I know it's our babies and our children. There's no man told us that we were the 5th generation. And they walked all the way from the eastern seaboard carrying a flame as the Muskogee Creek. And that's where Jimmy Carter has all his peanut farms today. That's the Muskogee Creek land. In 1975, we led the Trail of Broken Treaties walk on Washington. And we went through Muskogee, Oklahoma. This old man was cleaning all his culvert, big culvert like that with rocks in it, you know, because it flooded his garden, so he had to clean them out every year. And he was cleaning out his garden like that. All of a sudden he heard a drum. When I looked on the road way down, there's nothing there. He thought, well, I must be hearing things. And he went to work again and he started thinking, well, about the prophecy of Muskogee Creek. They talked about boarding schools and the diseases, diphtheria, and alcohol, the effect alcohol would have on Indian people with diabetes and all that. And went on through all that. He says and they'd be fenced in on these little reservations and their people would be dying from arthritis and all these different diseases. Diabetes #1 with Indian people. And he started counting the generations, and each generation is 25 years. So that was 125 years when he removed the Muskogee Creek and all those so-called civilized tribes from the eastern seaboard into Oklahoma. And he says that the conditions would be as they were. He said, but a new people would rise.
Wow.
And he said they would come dressed in red. It just happened that we couldn't grow it. I was the first one to grow my hair long. I used to have hair way down, you know. And people were scared because they would get punished for that. And we started doing that. And he says, because we couldn't grow our hair long, we all wore red berets when the movement first started. Everything was red. And he went out and looked on the road again, and here he saw this red blur coming at him. And it got closer and closer and closer. It was the American Indian movement. Wow. You know what he said? He led the political forum on the rights of indigenous people in the United Nations and carried that treaty issue all the way through. He said, that day I threw my wheelbarrow and my shovel away and I joined the American Indian movement. And the 6th generation is my daughter Susan. She's 46, 47 years old. Her children are the 7th generation. They're here,
Right.
all right? But now the Ojibwe say, well, who's going to light that 8th fire with all the pollution and all the water and oil things? They're putting pipelines right through our land and all of them. Who's going to stand up for us? Who's going to light the 8th fire? That's my granddaughter. You know, she's 7 years old and speaks the Ojibwe language, smart as can be. Unbelievable. They test her as a gifted child. She passed every test in Minneapolis. And all these little children, I was at a powwow one night on my reservation. They got 3 casinos up there, all right? So they put on these lavish powwows, $300,000 in gift prizes, best singers, best dancers. And all these dancers came into the room, and I was watching them, and they had all these little princesses, these little girls, 6, 7, 8 years old, came in, and they had so many of them, and they had these boys that come in, they call them young braves, and they came in, and it was altogether it was 50-some, and the MC just shook his head, because usually the MC has to introduce every one of them, what tribe, what nation. Instead of doing that, he came down. He said, "You guys introduce yourself." He gave them the mic.
Wow.
Every single one of those kids had a Anishinaabe name.
Beautiful.
That's all they had. They would not speak a word of English. And I was looking at some of these old ladies in the eyes, and they all start crying.
Wow.
Now when I said, "Did you ever think that we'd live to see that?" They're that 8th generation that are grandfathers. And it's not just the Indians. It's another, it's another national black. There's 4 sacred colors in our culture: red, yellow, white, and black. It's the 4 races of humankind. And all those children are on computers today. They don't have to go to a convention across the water somewhere, and they go to their computer to find out all about them. So their learning ability is all there today. They know everything. And those kids got up in there, every single one of them had an Indian name, and they introduced themselves, what tribe, what clan they came from.
Amazing.
And I looked at all these old people, and they all started crying.
Yeah, that's amazing.
One woman got up and said, "I never thought I'd live to see that day, when our kids would have their language back." But it's the same way in the black community, in the white community, and the yellow community.
Yeah.
Our children are excelling. They got computers, everybody's got a computer, except me.
Knowledge at fingertips.
Except me.
Except for you.
I run one of the top job training programs in the world. I'm that's serious now, but you can come down and visit me sometime. I'll take you around to all these things I'm talking to you about.
Thank you.
And they have the job training program, and everybody's required to have a high school diploma, or they have to get it and be computer literate. Guess what? I just know how to plug it in. I don't know how to run it. I don't know a damn thing about computers. But that's what we do.
Yes. Well, you know a lot of other things about a lot of beautiful things, and you have, it is really amazing. I do have a lot of hope for the youth of this world.
Well, I never forget them. I always make it a point to go and talk to them.
Well,
if I get an invitation to go talk to a schoolboy, I'm waiting all morning for the time to go over there, to talk to them. And let them know that they all play a role, because there's a lot of fear now.
That's right.
Not just us, all over the world.
All over.
All the crazy things.
Oh, it's
North Korea,
rampant.
the bombs, and that's all they talk about now. Today, bombing
right.
one another, killing one another. What about our children? What about the women?
Absolutely.
So I make it a point, no matter where I talk about the women and children suffer the most.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm 82 years old. I lived my life. I lived my life. I did everything I could possibly do. Now it's up to them, and they know how to do it, and they're doing it.
Yeah.
But you know what? They still call me and ask me to give a prayer or something like that.
That's right. We need our elders, absolutely. Yeah. And the youth of today need our elders and need elders to help them and show them the way. And that's so, so critical and important for the youth to succeed, is to have elders. It's spiritual elders. So you are one of those beautiful elders.
Well, there's a lot of young leadership. They're not as stupid as the Trump, They're smart. They're growing up.
Well, I just want to take a minute also to have a little moment here for our listeners who may have just joined us on KVAN Visionary Radio. And I am live here with Clyde Bellecourt, and his native name is Neegonnwayweedun, which is Thunder Before the Storm.
Yeah.
And he is the founder and national director of AIM, as well as many, many other endeavors in his life. I'm honored to be interviewing Clyde Bellecourt here today live on KVAN Visionary Radio. On the National Coalition of Racism and Sports website, you were quoted to say, "This generation of little children is the 7th generation." Now it's the 8th, you're saying. "Not just Indian children, but white, black, yellow, and red," as you just mentioned. "Our grandfathers said the 7th generation would provide new spiritual leaders, medicine people, doctors, teachers, and our great chiefs."
Engineers.
And yes, engineers. And there is a spiritual rebirth going on. Can you share more about how you see this spiritual rebirth happening in the world, and how do you envision all peoples of the world
Well,
coming
our
together?
people were silent until the movement formed. And that's why they listened. They had to have somebody say something in their favor. And the BIA and the educational system that doesn't know anything about us, they have to hear that. And we just took, one day we just said, we're not going to ask the government, we're not going to ask the churches, we're not going to ask anybody for nothing. We're just going to do it. We're just going to do it. And it caught fire. It caught fire. And there's one of the poorest tribes and nations, 30 miles from my home in Minneapolis, called the Shakopee Minnewacaton Dakota community. And they were so dirt poor, 30 years ago, they had little shacks with, they had rugs on over the dirt. I visited them, went out and talked to them and all that. And they built the very first casino in America. And the governor told them, Governor Perpich, the one that's running for governor again, told them they would never open that casino over his dead body. He's going to have state troopers and everybody there. And they never showed up. And they had a big feast, they had a big barbecue, T-bone steaks, and anything you wanted. They had it all outside. And the reporter come and asked him, Chief, he says, I'd like you to say your comments. The judge, the governor says this casino is not going to open. And he had a big scissor, about as big as that, and a ribbon about that wide. And he said, I only have one statement to make. And it's only 3 letters, 3 words. And he cut that ribbon like that, and his press statement said, go to hell. It just freaked everybody out, Now their per capita based payment every year is over $1 million each member. And last year, I know one of my friends, her name is Patricia Prescott, a very dear friend of mine. Her husband's the one that built that casino. And but she spilled the beans to me. She said they had so much money built up in their health and education program, and now that they're getting, $84,000, twice a month, that who would want to go to school? They can go get their own doctor. They don't need no. But the money built up there, they had billions. They had billions of dollars in the bank. So last year, she said they gave all the tribal members an extra $1 million bonus Christmas present. And the politicians now are always coming to them for their support,
Yeah.
This is the only thing the United States stands is money.
Well, we're going to take a moment at KVAN Visionary Radio, 91.7 FM on the dial. I've been doing an interview with Clyde Bellecourt here with me today. And the founder of KVAN Radio, Gabriel Virancha, hosted Clyde about 17 years ago in Sedona, Arizona for an event with Wallace Black Elk and others. And so we are honored to have him back here today. Clyde Bellecourt will be doing a talk at the Sea of Glass Center for the Arts tomorrow night, August 3rd at 7:30 p.m. And he will also be doing a book signing for his book, Thunder Before the Storm. Neegonnwayweedun is your native name, and you were sharing about past, present, future aspects of AIM. So right. I'll let you continue talking, sir.
Well, we just got through celebrating our 50th anniversary. That's what this shirt. And there's 7 chapters that didn't make it, but there was 22 of them that made it there. And some of them are from here in Arizona and over in California, San Diego, and places like that. And they told me they're going to meet me here tonight, or tomorrow night, and so I hope they make it.
Yes,
and I want to request the local community to come to this gathering.
Yeah.
Any questions they have following the talk, and hope that I'll be able to stand there and correct them on some of this stuff.
Yeah, and again, that's tomorrow night. Clyde Bellecourt will be giving a talk at the Sea of Glass Center for the Arts. That is more information at theseaofglass.org, and we are interviewing Neegonnwayweedun. Say that right?
Right.
And it means thunder before the storm. Yep. Powerful name for a powerful man who has done a lot in his life and work. I'd like to ask a little bit, because you had coined the term confrontational politics, and I was going to ask you if you could share more about what that term is and what that means.
I don't know where it came from. I was elected chairman, and they asked me how I was going to change things. They talked about Martin Luther King having millions of people out all over the world Poor people's campaigns and all that stuff was going on, and it just came to my mind, and I called it confrontation politics. But I also told them that before you did anything, you had to know what you're talking about.
That's right.
And the treaties you'll get that knowledge through the treaties. So when we do with hunting and fishing, we went to the boat lands and defended the elders that were out there fishing and getting arrested. And every boat landing we went to, there's a group called Stop Treaty Abuse, and this other racist group, two of the biggest ones in the country, and they all showed up. But CNN News and all them showed up too. And we went out and took a drum and went into the woods by those lakes and confronted those people. You wouldn't believe the names they're calling us. Bumper sticker, spear a pregnant Indian squaw and save 2 walleye. And they started calling us timber niggers. That was the last thing they started doing. They called us timber niggers, But it was good because it went against them. And I went to Milwaukee and back to Minneapolis and Chicago, people I met, started to ask Jesse Jackson, all them, and told them that they're now calling us timber niggers. And why don't you come out now and support us? And they all started coming.
Wow.
And the non-Indian sports fishermen people, they started disappearing. And then they lost in Wisconsin because there's a judge named, her name was Crabb, of all names, Judge Crabb. And she believed in the treaty rights so far that she recessed the court and got the University of Madison, Wisconsin. She got a bunch of students to go out and survey and find out if they were claiming that we were spearing thousands and thousands of walleye a year. So when they did the study, they found out the Indian people never took more than 20,000 walleyes out of the lakes of Wisconsin during the spearing season, fishing season. But they have a Great Lakes Indian Wildlife and Fishery. And when they accidentally spear a pregnant walleye or net them, they melt the eggs up. Then they take them to the Great Lakes Indian Wildlife and Fishery, and they turn into millions of walleye. Then they go back and put them back in the lake. And boy, that woman, you should have heard her, what she said. She said they ought to turn the Department of Natural Resources over to Indian people. They've been taking care of the fish and the wildlife all these years, and she ruled in our favor. So then they took the case to Minnesota. And of all people to hire as their chief spokesperson was Bud Grant, who was the coach for the Minnesota Vikings, who lost 4 Super Bowls, never won a Super Bowl yet. And I went to confront them. They were up in front of the state capitol and had all these sports fishermen driving around with the boats on their car and all these slogans, spear a pregnant Indian squaw and save 2 walleye, calling us timber niggers. And I went to the rally, and my brother Vern, they didn't want to mess around because the guys had 4 or 5 guns in their back window, And but I went right up to the podium. I went right up to the podium. My brother, you gotta get back. What the hell is wrong with you? To get shot? I said, so what? Get shot? I've been shot before, And so I went up there and I stood by Bud Grant. Everybody said, get out of here. We don't need you here. This is our rally and our press conference. I said, but I have a few words. And I was about this far from Bud Grant. And I could smell the liquor. And I said, I know. And I said, I took the podium and the mic, and I said, you know what? I'm overwhelmed that you would select Bud Grant as your chief spokesperson, because he's lost 4 Super Bowls in a row, and he's going to lose the biggest one of his life when this court goes to Supreme Court in Washington. And it was the judge that I hired that I talked about that didn't, come out of school and didn't know nothing. Well, he became the head federal judge for the first black federal judge in history. Very dear friend of mine. And he took that case, that the Indian people never gave up the right to hunt and fish, even particularly on the land that they ceded to the government. They could still hunt and fish deer or whatever. And he wrote a writ on it, and they ended up going through all the lower courts all the way, finally got in the Supreme Court. And sure enough, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor. So that affected every tribe in America could go fish and hunt. And they have proven that the Indian people put more back than they take.
Absolutely.
Millions more than they take. So we were able to start plugging into that type and finding those kinds of people. Especially Judge the Crab, she's a woman, elderly woman, and recessed the court and got the students to go out and see if this was the truth, and they came back with the truth. We have powerful forces together today, you know. And I got to meet some of the great leaders in America. I spoke at a year after Martin Luther King's assassination. I was in my office one night and I was really busy, and the secretary come in, Clyde, there's a woman on the phone wants to talk to you. And I said, well, who is it? She said her name is Coretta Scott. And I didn't think it was Coretta Scott King, you know. I said, well, tell her I'm busy right now and I'll call her back later. And I came back and everybody in the room, that's Coretta Scott King, what the hell is wrong with you? You know, so I ran out and I called her, you know. I said, I was on another call and I couldn't take it, but what do you want? And I got to march with her that year with her, and there was a guy named, his last name was Walker. He was an All-American that year, played for the Vikings, and he walked, held her hand on one side, and I held her hand on the other side. We marched from Atlanta out to the King residence where they got his grave. And I got to speak in Ebenezer Baptist Church that day. She called me there because she wanted me to speak about Wounded Knee and how could they help us, and that she was partying in herself. She wanted me to know that. And so we started enlisting those kinds of people. When I did my grand tour, when I left Wounded Knee on the 51st day, my job was to put together the defense committee. And of course I selected Doug Hall and Larry Leventhal and Ken Tilson from Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then I called, I was in New York, and I called William Kunstler, and his daughter answered the phone. And I could hear him holler, who is it? She said, it's Clyde Bellecourt. He wants to talk to you. And I heard him running across the floor. Give me that phone, give me that phone. And he got online, and I told him what was happening in Wounded Knee. We're expecting this big trial. A lot of people are going to get arrested. And my job is to put together the Wounded Knee Legal Defense Offense Committee. Mm-hmm. What do you mean when you say offense? I said, it means we're going to try the government. They're not going to try us. He said, well, why are you calling me? I said, any man that'll go to jail for contempt of court has to be a good lawyer. He said, I'll be there tomorrow. And he came, and I called Mark Lane. You know, Mark Lane was when I was in Kanyanke, when all those people were poisoned that day, and he escaped into the jungles and all that. Well, he was one of our lawyers. We had 12 lawyers. And for the first time in history in the Indian community, we investigated every potential juror. When I found out if they're Catholic, Lutheran, if they're related to any law enforcement person or marshal or FBI to connect. We did a thorough, lasted months before they were able to get a jury together. So we knew all the jurors, you know, who would be friendly to us, who wouldn't, you know. And that's kind of defense mechanism. We call it the Wounded Knee Legal Defense Offense Committee. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened. We found the government guilty.
Wow, that's powerful.
A lot of people don't know that, you know, when people hear about the American Indian movement, they think about mascot, they think about Wounded Knee. They don't know about the hospitals and the education, job training, and all these other things that we do, you know, in the community, and have done. Going on 50 years, they're still there. You know, they don't know that. A lot of Native people don't know that. So that's why I feel it's so important to have press conferences and stuff to educate the community, because a lot of them don't know the truth today.
Any thoughts to share with us before we close out?
You know, sometimes we think we did everything we wanted to do, but if you don't keep at it every day, you start falling backwards again.
That's right.
And so our community is politically, they know everything that's going on where I come from, the Twin City area, in South Dakota and places, and Sundances. I started the first Sundance in America, restarted it after 100 years. And when I took it over, there was a Catholic bishop out in a place called Holy Rosary Church on Pine Ridge that was running the Sundance. I couldn't believe it when I went there. And I made a commitment publicly, told people I was not going to allow him into the Sundance on Sunday. He wouldn't allow people to appear. They had merry-go-rounds, Ferris wheels, tilt-a-whirl, rodeo going. I thought I was at the wrong place. And then Kodag was there, Leonard Kodag, and he came up and told me that this was the place, you know. And when he told me that this Catholic priest was going to come in on Sunday, I made swear I would never allow that to happen, even though I wasn't from there. I'm not from Pine Ridge. I'm Ojibwe. Yeah. And the Ojibwe, and according to history in the Dakota Nation, warred for 100 years, which is a bunch of bunk, you know. But that's what they do. They like to make think that we fight together against one another. A lot of movies are like that today.
Yeah.
So that's what we do, and we think that we did things right, you know, and yet the results are in, and people are enjoying their life better. We've hundreds and thousands of young people getting a good education today. When the movement formed, you can count the PhDs on one hand in America. Now you got that one from your own community, more than that. My home reservations, where I'm from, White Earth is known for that, for PhDs.
Incredible.
People that went to Harvard. And Winona LaDuke, who leads the whole environmental network, you know, that's my first cousin, you know. So we have a lot of people like that now getting a good education. And they're going back. I confront them. I went to a big teacher's graduation in Moorhead in the early days, and I confronted all the Indian people that were graduating with teacher's license. I said, what the hell good does it do you if you don't take it back to your own community? And a lot of them went home and did that. And they're there today still helping their own people, you know. So I went to that level of confronting them, confrontation with them, but it turned out good, you know. And that's where, you know, the lady the one person I'm really proud of, his name is Elaine Staley. She's from, Elaine Salinas, she's from my home reservation. She came home to an alternative school on the White Earth Reservation, and she was in a red schoolhouse, and I started a whole prison program. That's one thing we don't talk about much here. We have sweat lodges today in all the prisons, not just state, but federal.
Oh, wow.
There's a young man here in Arizona, his name is Lenny Foster. He was in Wounded Knee, he was a warrior. He fought with the government with automatic weapons and everything, and he runs the whole federal systems, and it goes in all the federal prisons in America. Gets to go and see Leonard Peltier. Whenever we want Leonard to know something, he goes out and has a ceremony with him.
Wow.
Finds out. So we made those kind of connections with our own people. And I met him this weekend, and he's still doing that work. I said, what are you doing now? It's all white, almost gray, you know, white hair. I said, what are you doing now? I heard you retired, and you're playing golf and all that. And he started laughing, you know, because I always joke with people. And when are you going to retire? I said, when I learn how to play golf. I'll never learn how to play golf, you know. So I'm not worried about retiring, you know. So, but I meet those people every day, and they came to the conference. I said, what are you doing now? I'm still going into prisons, doing the work. Somebody has to do it, you know. So he goes in on the state side. We do that every day. Every day we got somebody in the prison. We got educational program, cultural awareness program. We got correspondence courses out of the University of Minnesota, going right into prison. We had one of our graduates graduate from prison. He was in there for manslaughter, you know, accidental manslaughter. He went to our culture class. He got out. He went to Harvard, and he studied corrections. And he came back to Minnesota, and he was the first ex-convict to be elected as the ombudsman for the state of Minnesota. So he gets to go in all the prisons, deal with all the racism and stuff like that.
Wow.
So we produce people like that, but most people don't know that, you know. I mean, they like to, you know, sensationalize their stories, or from Wounded Knee or BI takeover or something militant, you know.
Yes.
They don't hear about all the other good things that are going on. So I make sure to try to get that out all the time.
Thank you, Clyde. I know right now, currently, there's a man back east who's doing sun dances that you're trying to stop, and you're actively kind of talking about. Can you share a bit about that situation? And I'm sorry, I don't remember his name at the moment, but
I can't. There's so many of them doing that.
There's a article about it that just came out.
I heard about it. He's getting paid pretty good too.
Yeah.
He's a healer.
Exactly.
You know, he has visions and dreams and all that. I was going to deal with that, but there's so many doing that. They go over to Europe and all over. You go to Germany. I've been in Germany several times. They actually have cowboys and Indians there, and the ones that win all the time are the Indians. The hobbyists over there, they come in the most beautiful outfits you ever seen in your life. You go to Germany, you'll see them there. I went over there and met with them, you know, and they're doing a hell of a job educating people. There's a guy named Carl, what the heck is his name? Mantz or something, but he never been to America, but he writes all the best books you can ever read. Because when Black Elk and Sitting Bull and all those great chiefs were going on Wild Buffalo Bill show, Wild Bill Hickok had those buffalo, took them shows over to Europe, and the Indians caught on to that. Only they reversed everything. To become a hero and a big leader, you got to become an Indian chief. The Indians win all the time, you know, in their shows they put on.
Wow, what a thing.
I thought that was quite a difference from what we hear, you know.
Definitely, it is quite a difference. Right, well, thank you so much. It's been a real honor to be here
Thank
with
you.
you today.
Miigwech. Thank you.